Hello and welcome to Camp Xbox. The 7th generation of consoles like the Xbox 360 saw some fantastic releases. Among third-party publishers, Bethesda stands out as one of the strongest in my eyes. While we often associate Bethesda with internally developed games like Fallout 3 or Oblivion, they also published a ton of titles from various developers on the 360. Many of these games have faded into obscurity over time, and one such title is Wet, a grindhouse-tinged third-person shooter. I remember hearing a lot about it upon release, and I hardly see it get brought up anymore. Thankfully, we have some fans on the channel like these guys, and a recommendation from 13Carry1. So a big thank you for the recommendation. And recently I had the opportunity to play through Wet, and in this video I'll share some history, my personal opinion on the game, and discuss its lasting impact. Before we get into this, I quickly want to thank my YouTube channel members, and let's dive into Wet. It's interesting that I brought up Bethesda in the intro because Wet was originally slated to be published by Sierra Entertainment. However, the developer Artificial Mind and Movement, now known as Behavior, was tied to the project from the beginning. It's funny how they keep popping up in my videos, and it made me realize just how prolific of a company they were. And as a running gag, when is Ruby coming to Dead by Daylight? I gotta see it. Since its announcement in 2007, Wet seemed to maintain the same basic theme it had at launch. You follow Ruby, voiced by Eliza Dushku, an assassin skilled in killing and acrobatics, willing to take on any job for the right price. The game is styled after classic exploitation B-movies, with a clear influence from Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino's Grindhouse film that came out in 2007. Paying homage to that era of filmmaking. From the outset, it seemed like a concept that would translate well into a video game. However, in 2008, Sierra Entertainment's parent company, Vivendi Games, merged with Activision. Activision chose to move forward with only a select few franchises from the company, and unfortunately, Wet was not among them, leaving the game in limbo. The game wasn't cancelled though, and according to Artificial, it just needed a publisher to move forward. Thankfully, Bethesda stepped in and picked up the game for release in 2009. Wet could have easily been left dead in the water, but almost 2 years after its announcement, it was released in North America on September 15th, 2009 for the Xbox 360 and PS3. I remember playing the demo for this one back in the day, but I remember not being into it. Yet, that is a vague memory, and I recently played through it on the Xbox 360, and I'm excited to share my experience with you. In Wet, you step into the shoes of Ruby Malone, a mercenary tasked with retrieving a heart in a briefcase to save a life, a mission that sets the tone for this game as she ruthlessly kills anyone who crosses her path. This initial plot point serves as a springboard for the insane events that unfold throughout the game, featuring insane double-crossing, eccentric villains, and an array of acrobatic kills. With its heavy film grain and scratched celluloid aesthetic, the story exudes an old-school exploitation film vibe that is executed cohesively. The plot itself is straightforward, exaggerated, and somewhat nonsensical, but it never tries to pretend to be something it's not. Wet embraces its identity and leans into its over-the-top nature with excellence. In an experience like this, you expect something exaggerated and full of one-liners, and Wet delivers on this front excellently. The main character, Ruby, shoulders much of the plot's weight, embodying the epitome of a badass hero, who may come across as trying too hard to be badass. However, this overblown try-hard aesthetic becomes oddly charming. Ruby delivers some amazing, funny one-liners, and it's reminiscent of some of my favorite cheesy action movies. Ruby serves as the glue that holds the plot together, as the narrative itself is rather loose. You traverse from one location to another, dispatching bad guys, encountering quirky characters, and moving on to the next objective. Sometimes you get double-crossed along the way, but you are mostly hunting for information. While the plot doesn't break any new ground, it's undeniably entertaining. As a fan of exploitation classics, Wet strikes a nice balance with its simple yet enjoyable plot that serves to complement the action-packed gameplay. Don't expect a profound or life-changing narrative, instead anticipate something delightfully dumb and entertaining, and you'll settle right into the vibe that Wet has. The third-person shooter gameplay in Wet is the true star alongside Ruby, offering a highly entertaining experience from start to finish. It features slow-motion gunplay reminiscent of classics like Max Payne, and maybe closer to its release, John Woo's Stranglehold. The game employs a staged level design, typically consisting of multiple rooms or obstacle courses where players traverse to execute stylish kills. By using parkour moves such as jumping, sliding, or wall running, players can slow down time, enabling them to focus on enemies and take precise shots. Players have access to various weapons like shotguns, SMGs, and pistols, but they are always dual-wielding. In slow motion, the right gun auto-aims at one enemy, while players manually aim the other. It offers a unique, but initially odd mechanic that allows for precise targeting. Despite its initial awkwardness, the slow motion feature helps planning and precision. While players can run and shoot in real time, engaging in slow motion earns style points which can be used to purchase upgrades for Ruby. The more stylish the kills, the higher the multiplier, resulting in more points earned. While it may seem like a lot to take in, these mechanics are all you really need to focus on throughout the majority of the game, and they're the best part of the experience. Many of the rooms are designed to facilitate free flow parkour, allowing you to seamlessly transition from one element to the next and execute some truly impressive kills. The controls feel fantastic, with jumping and sliding requiring simple button presses, and movement overall feeling intuitive. You can also engage in up-close and personal combat with a sword, which can be activated with a simple button press. Despite its simplicity, the game's mechanics work in favor of the concept, maintaining a brisk pace throughout. I never felt stuck in a particular fighting area for too long, and I always felt like I was moving on to new locations to unleash chaos and wreak havoc consistently. While most of the gameplay in Wet is an absolute blast, there are moments where the energy isn't quite the same. Some levels feature a significant amount of platforming, and it's typical of 7th generation games involving a lot of climbing on ledges and hopping between different ledges. While this platforming is streamlined and functional, it lacks uniqueness and can feel somewhat uninspired. These areas generally don't have any enemies in it, but when there are enemies, the acrobatics flow seamlessly, and it allows for dynamic transitions between elements. However, during these platforming sections, which don't have any enemies, the energy just leaves, and the ledge-to-ledge jumping feels like a way just to get to point A to point B, rather than anything engaging. Similarly, there are 2 levels in Wet that take place on the backs of moving vehicles. While these levels possess more energy than the platforming sections, they aren't that enjoyable. They fall into a common pitfall of that generation by relying heavily on quick-time events. Personally, I don't dislike quick-time events, but in these vehicle levels, they feel overly scripted and lack the dynamic slow-motion actions present in other parts of the game. Jumping is reduced to hitting a button at the right time, which gives you the feeling that you aren't even playing the game. It would have been preferable for these levels to offer more gameplay mechanics and interactivity rather than feeling like extended cutscenes, which goes for some of the boss fights as well. Fortunately, these vehicle levels are a minimal part of the game, and the platforming transitions are another small part of the game. The core focus remains on the excellent bullet time gameplay. Wet maintains its high energy gameplay throughout the majority of the experience with only a few instances of tedium. Considering the game took me 7 hours to beat, with only about 30 minutes feeling tedious, it's a much better ratio compared to some other games. For me, I don't mind a 7-hour playtime. I actually like a nice short condensed experience if it's really good. The game starts and wraps up perfectly within this time frame, and it offers additional difficulties for replay value. Looking at its core gameplay, Wet is a gem that I had a lot of fun playing. I wish I could go back to 2009 and tell myself to give it a second chance because it's highly entertaining and offers a unique and exhilarating experience. Graphically, the style is present in Wet, but in terms of graphical quality, it doesn't stand out. Character models aside from the lead lack detail. Additionally, animations for some regular enemies appear choppy. While the locales are reminiscent of the era, they don't really grab your attention except for the lead character. Ruby's animations, however, are fluid, especially during acrobatic sequences. Her mid-air twists and leaning back to shoot while sliding and descending ladders on your back are excellent and contribute significantly to the intuitive slow motion mechanic. Now, with the film grain effect, normally I disable that or motion blur if possible. I'm not a big fan, but in Wet, the film grain adds to the game's aesthetic. It seamlessly transitions between scenes with drive-in interstitials, enhancing the overall energy. While the option to disable it exists like an old movie, you become accustomed to the look over time. I particularly enjoy the scenes where Ruby gets sprayed with blood and the world turns red and black. These segments, despite having the same gameplay mechanics, are faster paced. Not only are they enjoyable, but they also provide a striking visual contrast from the rest of the game. It breaks up the action. These sections specifically remind me of Superhot, and it wouldn't surprise me if there was some influence from Wet on Superhot's development. One of the standout elements of this game is its music. Primarily consisting of licensed tracks, most action scenes are accompanied by various rockabilly tunes. While not a genre that I know a lot about, the team curated a diverse selection of acts to craft a soundtrack that works with the game's themes. Rough vocalists paired with punchy guitars give this game a unique Western punk edge that I've rarely seen in other video games. These songs might not be something I'd listen to by itself, but they complement the action scenes effectively, which I appreciate. However, some players might find these tracks grating, so individual preferences may vary. Overall, I just found it to be a neat soundtrack, even featuring instrumentals that suit the game's vibe well. However, the voice acting could have been better, mainly among the non-star cast members, such as the henchmen who repetitively spout the same one-liners. The repetition can become tiresome, especially when certain phrases are overused, like hearing about their special sauce repeatedly. Ruby, who is voiced by Eliza Dushku, who has a dedicated fan following, was a major draw for many players. Now, I'm not really familiar with her work beyond a few select roles in movies. I've never watched Buffy. I find her portrayal of Ruby to be quite compelling. She brings a rough-edged and vulgar tone to the character that feels natural, and her delivery of one-liners adds humor to the game. However, there's a noticeable amount of repetition in her lines, whether she's swearing at a door or telling someone to bite me, which can become grating over time. I will say though, in cutscenes, she shines, along with the other notable actors like Alan Cumming and Malcolm McDowell, whose voice I always enjoy hearing. McDowell's portrayal of villains in movies and video games is always top-notch. In conclusion, Wet is a game that fully embraces its style and gameplay, even if it doesn't excel in graphics, story, or audio. However, it successfully achieves its goal of channeling the spirit of modernized exploitation classics similar to the works of Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez during this era in time. This game is unapologetically in your face with its angst and style, and for me, it makes it difficult not to enjoy. The core shooting gameplay is an absolute blast, and the exhilarating feeling of blowing away enemies while performing acrobatic maneuvers is great. Ruby's delivery of angst-ridden triads adds to the entertainment value, along with the lovably dumb story. The game's visual aesthetic, complete with a degraded film stock look, enhances that action flick vibe. Admittedly, Wet isn't without its flaws, with some subpar levels detracting from the overall experience. However, as a whole, it delivers an enjoyable ride. I was pleasantly surprised by how much my opinion of this game changed upon revisiting it, and I'm glad to have returned to it. On my Xbox 360 ranking list, Wet secures the 7th spot out of the 17 titles I've reviewed on the channel. Wet received a fairly average critical reception upon its release, with an average Metacritic score of 69 out of 100. Most reviews fell within the 6 to 7 range, highlighting the game's enjoyable gameplay while pointing out its shortcomings in other areas. For instance, IGN's review scoring of 6.6 out of 10 noted that it lacked any lasting satisfaction, whereas GameSpot's slightly higher score of 7.5 out of 10 praised the soundtrack and gunplay despite what it called rough visual quality. Official Xbox Magazine gave it a 7 in their December 2009 issue, loving the Kill Bill vibe but didn't see enough variety. The consensus seemed to revolve around the debate of style versus substance, with some players enjoying its aesthetic and gameplay while others found it repetitive. Despite mixed reviews, Wet 2 was announced in 2010, indicating that the game may have sold well initially. However, the project was later shut down almost a year later, signaling the end of Wet as a potential franchise. Over the years, Wet has garnered a cult following, with many fans admiring its fun aesthetics and gameplay. User aggregate website Backlog reflect this diverse nature of the game, with some praising its style, while others criticize its repetitiveness. As of now, Wet holds an average of 2.9 out of 5 on Backlog. Despite its divisive nature, Wet remains a game worth checking out. But that wraps it up for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this review. If you did, leave a like. Also comment below with any opinions on Wet, whether you loved or hated it. Subscribe to keep up with the retro Xbox content. Also, I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube channel members. Thank you so much for the support, and I'll see you here next time at Camp Xbox.